Hi, everyone. It's Professor Dingman here, and I wanted to take you through our research essay ideal level outline. So, how this differs from a sentence level outline is that this is just ideas, right? Bullet points. Your ideas don't have to be put into complete sentences or complete thoughts. You're just trying to organize what you want to say and the order in which you want to say it. So, that's what we're going to be taking a look at today, a student sample from the research essay idea level outline. So you'll see the first thing that you start off with up here is the introduction. I want you guys to start considering hook ideas if you haven't already pulled up some facts or statistics or thought about how you're going to start this essay. Now's the time to start thinking about what you want to do to start off this essay. And here are some suggestions. This is what this student chose. Cartoons on mental health in prisons. Keep that in mind that cartoonists don't just write funny comics, that some cartoonists also write political comments or kind of social commentary type comics. So that is an option. Let me show you. So if you were to just kind of Google political prison cartoons, you'll see a lot of things pop up. I picked this one here. So just to show you, it pulls up this guy's webpage, and he's done some cartoons that are making a comment, right? This one seems to be about the revolving door. This one's about the school to prison pipeline. This one's about this looks like it's making a commentary on just how we lock up large amounts of Americans, especially considering the population against other countries who are incarcerated. So that's an option, right? Is to consider starting your essay off with a political cartoon. Keep in mind that that would be kind of the first thing, right? Your hook and then your elaboration is you would want to comment on the cartoon. And of course, please look up how to properly include and cite a picture or a cartoon in MLA formatting. Okay, so this person also jotted down maybe using a quote from Orange is the New Black if you don't want to deal with cartoons. You can also look at statistics on how many people are dealing with mental illness or mental health issues in prison. This is very specific to this person's essay, okay, but there's just some examples. So the intro is where we're going to focus on summarizing Orange is the New Black for our text, but we don't have to worry about that right now. Then you want to take a look at your thesis statement. And still, this is kind of a working thesis, but you want to look at what you did for your research proposal and start adding more details or more points to your thesis. But it doesn't have to be your final thesis. So let's take a look at this person's thesis. Prison houses, is what it should say, prison houses a large amount of individuals with mental health issues, and those mental health problems aren't being treated properly and are only making it worse for these inmates. In return, this is hurting our society, and this is not treating these inmates humanely at all. Okay, so they're looking at how the mental health isn't being treated properly, which makes it worse. So I guess the mental health is worsening for the inmates. It's not entirely clear if it's only their mental health that's becoming worse, or if it's like the whole experience of being in prison is worsened because they're mentally ill. So that might be a point to clarify, and then maybe get a little bit more specific here in the next version of the thesis. How is it hurting our society, right? What are the repercussions of having somebody who hasn't received any mental health treatment in prison for when they get out? What happens to us? What happens to them if they haven't been receiving any kind of treatment or health care regarding their mental illness or mental health issues? So it's a really good point. So for this, I put clear thesis because I can see this is where they're headed, right, at this stage. No, it's not the final draft of a thesis. No, it's not a perfect or clear thesis. But for this, it is sort of clear, right, for what we're doing. Then the next section here is where you're going to introduce your problem, right? And that's why I have this note here. This will be a background paragraph, a background section for your topic, right? So the intro is kind of grabbing the reader's attention and summarizing Orange is the New Black, ending with your thesis. And then you get into the background of your problem, right? You have to inform your audience. So this person's focusing on mental health issues. So they need to give us a little bit of background. Why Why are they covering this topic? How big of an issue is it, right? So let's take a look at what they give us. While prisons are supposed to correct certain individuals and help those with mental issues, prisons are doing the opposite and only making problems worse. Instead of helping these mentally ill inmates and helping them get back into society, they are treating these inmates poorly, and these inmates' health is only getting worse. Not helping them with their mental issues is inhumane and affecting society negatively. Okay, so this is a brief kind of background. I could use a little bit more here. Okay, you'll see it kind of just feels like they're repeating their thesis a little bit. So this would be a good place to include, right, how many inmates suffer from mental health concerns, right? What kind of treatment do prisons, jails have? What happens upon release? So, like, if they do start a mental health program in prison, are they able to continue that once they leave prison? Because for some people, it's not kind of a, you've received some treatment and now your problem is all gone. For some people, managing their mental health issues or mental health illnesses might be a lifelong pursuit as opposed to something temporary. So, these are some questions that this person should be addressing or letting us know about in their background section. So, how many inmates suffer from mental health concerns? What kind of treatments do they have? What happens upon release? Are those treatments continued? And I might want to say, in what ways are the prisons and jails making mental health problems worse? They're not being very clear. They're just saying that instead of helping, they're harming them. Well, how? How are they harming them? What specifically are they doing that's making this problem worse? So, make sure you're addressing that kind of information in the background. Make sure you're not just repeating yourself over and over, which is what they're starting to do here. We don't really get any new information in the background section that we didn't already get in the thesis. So please make sure you're giving background information, right? Remember what the prompt says. The prompt says you're writing for somebody who's not in this class and therefore hasn't read the same things you have read and doesn't have the same knowledge, right? So don't assume that they know what you're talking about. You have to give us all that information. Pretend you're not writing for me. Okay, so then we get into their main points, right? Because now they're supposed to be explaining to us how the system is making all these things worse. So their first section says prisons should treat mental health issues with more care. Okay, so that's what this whole section is going to be about. Now let's see what kind of details they're going to be talking about. So they're going to be explaining how prisoners are seen as bad people. I would want to know kind of what else do you have going on here? This is one supporting idea, but maybe let's say prisoners are seen as bad people. So maybe since they are seen as bad, does that mean they shouldn't get help in prison? And I think that's kind of what this person is trying to explain to us, right? That we see prisoners as bad people, and therefore we don't want to provide them with health care, whether it's physical health care or mental health care or education or job training, because we look at that as like, oh, that's a benefit. If you're receiving health care in this country, it's a benefit because there's a lot of people who are working or going to school and they don't have health insurance, so they're not able to get treatment. So that is a common concern that people have, right? People get very upset that prisoners get health care when they can't get health care. So that's kind of an issue, right, that they're bringing up, and I think that's interesting. It's an issue worth bringing up. So prisons aren't treating inmates with mental health issues. So I guess this means they're being completely careless, and I would like examples here. Prisons have poor living conditions as well as poor mental doctors. So I think they're talking about this seems more like it would belong down here in inhumane conditions. So I would say maybe this part, right? And that's the whole process of this is you figure out, do things work where they are? So I would say this should move to, what's that section? Inhumane conditions. Oops. Inhumane conditions section. It just doesn't really belong here. If they're going to be talking about living conditions, that seems like it belongs there, as well as poor doctors. So this, we would need more specific details in the essay, right? What do you mean by poor doctors? What do we mean here? Poor at their job, overwhelmed, right? Because if we read, in reading Orange is the New Black, she made it clear that I think there were something like 1,200 women at the camp, and they had one doctor who was able to provide psychiatric help, and so she said he pretty much just wrote prescriptions, right? That's how they kind of dealt with mental health issues, was just issuing medication. Okay, so this is their prison should treat mental health issue with more care section. Now they're getting into what it seems like psychiatric hospitals versus prisons. And this one might be a paragraph that maybe should come before this one, because it kind of seems like here they're trying to explain, well, what's the difference between a psychiatric hospital and a prison, and maybe would people be better off in a psychiatric hospital as opposed to a prison? So maybe we should consider moving this one. So it comes right after the background section, right? Because that kind of seems like logically would make more sense, that you could then explain the difference between psychiatric hospitals and prisons, and then you could start talking about why prisons aren't as effective as maybe a psychiatric hospital, right? Because they're not being treated with care, the living conditions are inhumane, right? So I would reorganize that. So what they're trying to say about psychiatric hospitals is that people serve their time rather than get better. Okay, so this, I think what they're saying here is in prison, right? In prison. People serve their time. Let's just make that clear for ourselves. That would be the comment that I would say. People are treated poorly for this one. They're not saying very clearly where, right? Where? Hospital or prison. You want to make sure you're differentiating if you're talking about two different things. Usually only one mental health doctor. And again, that goes back to right up here with what we were talking about. In prisons, they don't have a full staff of doctors, right? Whereas in mental health hospitals, psychiatric hospitals, they do have a whole staff of doctors and nurses and healthcare providers. Nurses. Okay. So that would be a point to make the differentiation, right? Is that psychiatric hospitals versus prisons, right? Prisons, you're there to serve time, not get help. The treatment is not great because, again, you're in prison, and there's not a whole staff of doctors, nurses, and other healthcare providers because, again, it's a prison. Whereas a psychiatric hospital, it's the reverse of that, right? The focus is not as a punishment, but for people to improve their health. This one's kind of sketchy, right? We have heard some horror stories about psychiatric hospitals, but things have changed. And then lastly, there's more accountability about on those types of facilities now than in the past. And then lastly, obviously, if it's a hospital, specifically a psychiatric hospital or one that has a hospital that has a pretty big psychiatric unit, then they have more than one doctor treating the patients. So they're bringing up good points. They just need to make it a little bit clearer for themselves and for us, the reader. Okay, so then they get into the inhumane conditions, and again, I'm assuming that this is about prison, right? And so they're going to tell us about the poor living qualities, which is why I said it doesn't need to be talked about up here if it belongs in here. Not helping the situation, only making it worse. This is one where I want to say, no, how? How? Be specific. How is having those living conditions making it worse? And then not able to get back into society. Again, how? Right? How does this connect to mental health? How does this connect to mental health? I'm not sure. This kind of feels like it could be off topic a little bit if they're talking about reentry. I guess if they're making the claim that the inhumane conditions were so bad that it worsened the mental health issue and that makes it more difficult for them to get back into society, that could work. But this one is potentially off topic. So I'd put maybe another note here. Might be getting off topic. And you want to watch that because it's really easy to try to pull in way too much on this paper, right? Because a lot of these issues are related, but you want to make sure you're not taking on too big of a topic. Remember, this is a 6-page paper, and you are going to be spending some time, as I indicate up here in the introduction, explaining, right, summarizing Orange is the New Black, and then explaining your prison problem. And that will take up anywhere from a page to a page and a half. So then you're at 4.5 to 5 pages that you're writing for the content of this paper. And that's not including the conclusion, right? So you want to make sure that you do pick something that you can handle in, 4 or 5 pages and not run out of time to write about all those things. We want to narrow it down. Okay, so their next point, then, moving on from the inhumane conditions, their final main section is prisoners should help these inmates with mental health issues, or excuse me, prisons should help these inmates with mental health issues and help them be able to get back into society. So this seems kind of like they're explaining, here's reforms that should be taken, which is fine. They're explaining the problems, and now they're kind of presenting solutions. So what they have here is rehabilitation. Okay, for this one, I would say I want to know what kind of rehabilitation. That would be good. Maybe list those things out. Learn ways to cope with being mentally ill. Oh, okay, I like that. They're like learning health techniques. Okay, so and health treatment, that might be part of that, right? Is making sure they understand they need to continue treatment if they started treatment in prison or jail. And then lastly here is that same point. So I see that kind of recycled again, that they're there to serve their time rather than get better. And you want to be careful about that. You don't want to get too repetitive because, once we bring up an issue, don't keep coming back to it. So I tell this person to remove this because we've already talked about that. So what else do you want to say? Rehab, how, and learn ways to cope with being mentally ill, what kind. They need to come up with a third point that's not just about getting better and serving their time. We've already covered that. So the last section that we look at, as always, is our conclusion. And don't forget, there's 2 main things you need to do in the conclusion: restate your thesis and address the significance of the topic. So right here, you want to find a way to start rewording your thesis idea, which was up here at the top. Again, remember, we're not just copying and pasting, we're restating the thesis. Inmates that have mental health issues and that have problems are only getting worse to our criminal justice system. They aren't being treated properly, and there isn't any justice for them. Because of all this, they aren't able to step back into society and go on with their lives. Okay, so a bit of a run-on sentence, but we can see it's pretty similar to what they were talking about up there in their first version of the thesis. And then the so what is you to start thinking about ideas to bring the paper to a close. The so what? Why should people care? Why does this matter? Why is this a topic that we discuss? Why is this a topic that we're looking at in this class? So if prisoners aren't treated properly and actually helped with their problems, they aren't going to be able to make a better society. So he's kind of bringing it back to that societal issue, which I guess is a fair point because, like I said, remember what he talks about in one of his very first points is that people see prisoners as bad people that don't necessarily deserve treatment like mental health care and physical health care and job training and education. And so I guess he's trying to come back to that point here in the conclusion, right? That, okay, we can look at it as an individual who's getting lots of things that maybe they don't deserve, or we can look at it as, but who is this person going to be when they come back into our society? Do you want somebody who's coming back into the society that has had some kind of treatment and rehabilitation and has made some kind of progress, or do you want the person who is exactly the same or worse than when they first went in? So I see the point that he's trying to get to here. He might just want to give a little bit more depth to that. Like I said, I'm able to pick up on it. And I've read this paper, so I know what he was trying to do here, but you might want to make that connection clearer, right? That people look at prisoners as bad people, and even if they can't change their attitude about prisoners being bad people, maybe they can look at it as it's beneficial for all of society if we have fewer people with mental and physical health issues who are able to participate in society and not commit crimes. Okay, so that's what you're doing for the idea level outline. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you that your outline's wrong. I'm just going to give you some feedback like I did with your research proposal. Okay, it's just for a way for you to start seeing what you want to talk about and how to get organized, as I demonstrated here. Right, you can start to see if you're getting repetitive or if some ideas belong in other sections. Okay, so of course, if you have any questions or any concerns, please make sure you reach out to me via text or email, or right, you can always book an appointment with our embedded tutor or upload your draft and have the tutor look at it for you later if you don't have time to do a live conference. All right, guys, thank you so much. I'll see you soon.